Number 1. The Zanclean Flood. 5.33 million years ago, the Mediterranean Sea did not exist. Or rather, it had stopped existing. For roughly 600,000 years, the basin that would one day host Egyptian, Phoenician, Greek, and Roman civilizations was a sun-scorched pit of salt and silence. The Messinian salinity crisis had sealed the Mediterranean off from the Atlantic. Tectonic uplift at the Strait of Gibraltar pinched the connection shut. Without oceanic inflow, evaporation did the rest. The sea shrank, it retreated into hypersaline lakes, and eventually, in many areas, it vanished entirely. What it left behind was a wasteland. Salt deposits up to 3 kilometers thick, the crystallized residue of an ocean that had boiled away under the African sun. The basin floor, now exposed, sat 3 to 5 kilometers below the surrounding land. At that depth, adiabatic heating pushed temperatures to between 50 and 80 degrees Celsius. Nothing vertebrate could survive there. The air would have been thick with chemical haze, sulfur, chlorine, the outgassing of a dying sea. Then, the Atlantic broke through. Daniel Garcia Castellanos and colleagues modeled the refilling event in 2009. Their estimate, up to 90% of the water transfer occurred in a period of months to 2 years. At peak flow, the channel at Gibraltar carried approximately 100 million cubic meters of water per second. That is roughly 1,000 times the discharge of the Amazon River, the largest waterfall in known Earth history. The erosion channel it carved is still visible in seismic surveys of the strait, a deep incision in the bedrock extending hundreds of meters below the current seafloor. Mediterranean sea level rose by approximately 10 meters per day at peak flow. Anything living in the basin was obliterated. Aaron McAuliffe and colleagues identified a massive erosional channel off Malta in 2018, 5 kilometers wide and 20 kilometers long, consistent with catastrophic flooding on an almost incomprehensible scale. Not everyone agrees it happened this fast. Jean-Pierre Souc and colleagues proposed in 2011 that the refilling was gradual, unfolding over thousands of years. The debate mirrors a similar controversy about the Black Sea, and it remains unresolved. But the physical evidence, the erosion channels, the sediment distribution, the abruptness of the faunal turnover increasingly favors the catastrophic model. During the dry period, land bridges had connected Africa to Europe across the empty basin. Hippopotamus, elephant, and rodent fossils found on Mediterranean islands, Sicily, Sardinia, Crete, Malta, are evidence of these crossings. Island dwarfism subsequently produced miniature elephants and giant rodents, evolutionary oddities born from isolation. When the flood came, those bridges vanished. The biogeography of the entire region was rewritten. Wout Krijgsman and colleagues established the precise dating in 1999 using astrochronology, calibrating sediment cycles against Earth's orbital parameters. The salt deposited during the crisis represents approximately 5% of all dissolved salt in the world's oceans. The Mediterranean's evaporation measurably reduced global ocean salinity. The Zanclean Flood created the Mediterranean. Every harbor, every trade route, every naval empire that would ever exist around its shores was made possible by this single catastrophic refilling. The stage was built in months. What happened on it would take millions of years to unfold. But 40,000 years ago, something would clear that stage entirely. Number 2. The Campanian End-Permian Ignimbrite eruption. 39,850 years ago, the Phlegraean Fields caldera system, west of what is now Naples, Italy, detonated at Vivo E-War 7. 200 to 300 cubic kilometers of pyroclastic material launched into the atmosphere. The eruption column reached 40 to 44 kilometers into the stratosphere. Pyroclastic flows, superheated clouds of gas and rock traveling at hundreds of kilometers per hour, extended at least 70 to 80 kilometers from the caldera in all directions, incinerating everything across the Campanian plain. The ash traveled further. The Y5 Tepher layer, the eruption's chemical fingerprint, has been identified from southern France to the Russian steppe. A fallout zone covering more than 3.7 million square kilometers. It is one of the most important chronological markers in European archaeology, a thin gray line in the sediment that says, "This is when the world changed." Antonio Costa and colleagues modeled the climatic aftermath in 2012. a volcanic winter lasting 2 to 3 years. Hemispheric temperatures dropping 1 to 2 degrees Celsius on average, but regional cooling in Europe reaching 4 to 6 degrees. Benjamin Black and colleagues went further in 2015, modeling the atmospheric chemistry. Sulfur and halogen emissions would have caused severe acid rain, ozone depletion, vegetation failure across the continent. The eruption coincides almost exactly with the period during which Neanderthals disappeared from their last strongholds in Europe. This is either the most consequential coincidence in human prehistory or the smoking gun for their extinction. Paul Millars and Jennifer French argued in 2011 that the Campanian Ignimbrite acted as a coup de grace. Neanderthal populations were already under pressure from Homo sapiens expansion. The eruption devastated their remaining habitat. Svante Pääbo's genetic analysis showed that effective Neanderthal population sizes were already extremely small, perhaps 1,000 to 5,000 individuals. At that scale, a single catastrophic event could be demographically fatal. But John Lowe and colleagues complicated the picture in 2012. Their refined T4 chronology showed that Neanderthal disappearance at some sites precedes the eruption by several centuries. And Clive Finlayson has argued since 2004 that Neanderthals were already in terminal decline from climate oscillations and habitat fragmentation. The volcano may have hit a population that was already dying. Gigi Svoboda found something striking at the Stranska Skala site in the Czech Republic. Modern human Aurignacian tool assemblages appeared directly above the Y5 tephra layer. Sapiens moved into vacated Neanderthal territory almost immediately after the eruption. The Aurignacian techno-complex shows rapid innovation, new forms of art, blade technology, personal ornamentation, flowering in the eruption's aftermath. The green-gray tuff produced by the Campanian Ignimbrite forms the bedrock of modern Naples. 3 million people live on top of the same caldera complex today. The Phlegraean fields are not extinct. Bradyseismic episodes, ground uplift driven by magma movement, have been accelerating since 2012. Over 16,000 micro-earthquakes have been recorded between 2023 and 2025. The caldera that may have ended the Neanderthals is still very much alive. But 27,000 years later, the threat would come not from below the Earth, but from above it. Number 3, the Younger Dryas impact. 12,800 years ago, the world was warming. The great ice sheets were retreating. Megafauna roamed North America. Mammoths, mastodons, ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, horses, camels. The Clovis people, the first widespread technologically sophisticated human culture on the continent, were thriving. Then something happened. Temperatures in the North Atlantic region dropped by 7 to 10 degrees Celsius within decades, possibly within a single human lifetime. The planet plunged back into near glacial conditions for approximately 1,200 years. This is the Younger Dryas stadial. In 2007, Richard Firestone, Alan West, and colleagues proposed an explanation. A comet or cosmic airburst struck or exploded above North America. Their evidence was a layer found at over 50 archaeological sites, a dark, carbon-rich stratum called the black mat. Within it, anomalous concentrations of nanodiamonds, magnetic microspherules, and iridium. Markers typically associated with extraterrestrial impacts. The Clovis culture vanishes from the archaeological record almost exactly at this boundary. The megafaunal extinctions were catastrophic. Approximately 35 genera of large mammals, roughly 80% of all megafauna weighing over 44 kilograms, disappeared within a narrow window. The hypothesis has been under sustained attack ever since. Todd Suravel and colleagues failed to replicate the nanodiamond findings at several key sites in 2009. The dispute has been bitter and personal. In 2018, a massive impact crater 31 kilometers wide was discovered beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland. Initial excitement positioned it as the smoking gun. But Kerr and colleagues dated it in 2022 to approximately 58 million years ago. Far too old. The leading alternative explanation attributes the Younger Dryas to a massive freshwater pulse from glacial Lake Agassiz draining into the North Atlantic, disrupting thermohaline circulation. No extraterrestrial object required, but the impact hypothesis refuses to die. Andrew Moore and colleagues found evidence at Abu Huraira in Syria in 2020. Melt glass formed at temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. The first Old World evidence: a village destroyed and abandoned at the exact younger Dryas boundary, its inhabitants shifting from sedentary farming back to nomadic foraging. James Kennett expanded the evidence further with platinum anomalies in Greenland ice cores. And Gary Haynes has maintained since 2023 that human overkill, not climate or impacts, drove the extinctions, Paul Martin's Pleistocene overkill hypothesis, first proposed in 1967. The younger Dryas ended as abruptly as it began. Greenland ice core data shows temperatures rising 10 degrees Celsius in approximately a decade around 11,600 years ago. The post-Younger Dryas warming coincides with the earliest evidence of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent. Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest known monumental structure, was built at approximately 11,500 years ago, immediately after the cold snap ended. Some researchers speculate it memorializes the catastrophe. Whether a comet, a lake, or human hunters caused it, the Younger Dryas erased a world. The one that replaced it would be agricultural, settled, and urban, but the transition would not be gentle. In the Middle East, a glacial lake was about to erase another civilization. Number 4, the 8.2 Kiloyear Event. 8,200 years ago, the largest abrupt climate event of the Holocene struck. A cold snap lasting 100 to 400 years dropped North Atlantic temperatures by 1 to 3 degrees Celsius and disrupted weather patterns globally. The trigger was spectacular. Glacial lakes Agassiz and Ojibwe, proglacial lakes covering approximately 841,000 square kilometers, larger than the modern Black Sea, had been sitting across central North America behind the retreating Laurentide ice sheet. The ice dam failed. The lakes burst through and drained into Hudson Bay in an estimated half a year to 2 years. 100,000 to 200,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water poured into the North Atlantic. This pulse disrupted the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the oceanic conveyor belt that transports warm tropical water northward. When the surface water became too fresh, it stopped sinking. The conveyor stalled. Europe and the Near East cooled rapidly. Greenland ice core records show a sharp oxygen isotope excursion at this boundary, one of the most clearly defined climate signals in the Holocene record. The archaeological consequences were devastating. The pre-pottery Neolithic bee culture, one of the earliest agricultural societies in the world, shows widespread site abandonment and population dispersal around this time. Aşıklıhöyük contracted. Çatalhöyük entered a decline phase. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Levant, settlements emptied. Arlene Rosen and colleagues documented in 2007 how the event triggered aridification in the Levant, forcing farming communities to migrate toward major river systems, particularly the Tigris and Euphrates. Bernhard Wenninger proposed in 2006 that this established a pattern that would repeat throughout prehistory. Climate shock, then migration, then urbanization, then state formation. The 8.2 Kiloyear Event may have accelerated the transition from dispersed Neolithic villages to the concentrated urban centers of Mesopotamia, climate refugees building the world's first cities. Harvey Weiss argued in 2016 that this was the prototype for every subsequent collapse event in Near Eastern civilization, a template that would play out again, catastrophically, 2,000 years later. The Speleotheme records from caves in Turkey, Israel, and Oman independently confirmed the drying. The methane decrease in ice cores reflects weakened tropical wetlands. The growing season shortened by 2 to 4 weeks across Europe. Marginal agricultural land became unviable. Ian Hodder has countered that internal social dynamics at sites like Çatalhöyük were already driving population dispersal. The climate event accelerated a process already underway, but the correlation between the lake drainage, the AMOC disruption, and the archaeological abandonment is too tight to dismiss. The drainage of Lake Agassiz left behind the flat, fertile lake bed that became the Canadian Prairies, one of the most productive agricultural regions on Earth today. A geological inheritance from catastrophe. Fresh water had destroyed one world and inadvertently built another, but the worst was still to come. Not water, not fire, something older. Number 5, the End-Permian mass extinction, 251.9 million years ago, life on Earth nearly ended. Not reduced, not diminished. Nearly ended. The End-Permian mass extinction, the Great Dying, killed approximately 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates, an estimated total species loss of 81 to 96%. It is, by every measure, the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. Nothing before or since has come close. The killer was the Siberian Traps, a large igneous province in what is now central Russia. Over a period of roughly 1 million years, eruptions produced 3 to 4 million cubic kilometers of basaltic lava. The eruptions released an estimated 30,000 to 40,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Global temperatures rose by 8 to 10 degrees Celsius. The carbon isotope excursion at the Permian-Triassic boundary is one of the largest in the geological record. The global carbon cycle did not just shift, it broke. Ocean acidification drove pH levels down by an estimated 0.7 units, dissolving the calcium carbonate shells and skeletons of marine organisms. Reef-building corals, which had existed for hundreds of millions of years, were annihilated. The reef gap that followed lasted approximately 10 million years. Jonathan Payne and colleagues documented in 2004 that reef ecosystems simply ceased to exist for longer than the entire current age of mammals. Oceanic Euxinia, anoxic, hydrogen sulfide saturated water, spread across approximately 90% of the global ocean floor. Vast dead zones where no aerobic life could survive. Seth Burgess and colleagues refined the timing in 2017. The main extinction pulse unfolded over approximately 60,000 years. Rapid on geological timescales, slow enough to be agonizing. Entire ecological guilds vanished. Trilobites, which had survived 300 million years and multiple previous mass extinctions, were finally erased. Eurypterids disappeared. Most brachiopod families were destroyed. On land, the dominant Permian fauna, large synapsids like gorgonopsians and dicynodonts, were wiped out. The Siberian magma did not just erupt through rock, it intruded through coal deposits and evaporate layers, generating additional greenhouse gases, toxic fly ash, and halogenated compounds that destroyed the ozone layer. Yadong Sun and colleagues used oxygen isotope data from conodonts in 2012 to reconstruct ocean temperatures. Tropical sea surface temperatures reached 40 degrees Celsius, lethal to virtually all marine life. The tropics became a dead zone. Michael Benton estimated in 2003 that fewer than 10% of species survived. Recovery to pre-extinction biodiversity took approximately 10 million years, the longest recovery of any mass extinction event. The survivors were predominantly small, generalist species. Disaster taxa. Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized dicynodont, became so dominant that it comprised an estimated 95% of all terrestrial vertebrate individuals, an unprecedented ecological monopoly born from annihilation. And here's why this matters to us. The removal of dominant synapsid lineages created the ecological vacuum that archosaurs filled. Archosaurs produced dinosaurs. Dinosaurs dominated for 165 million years until their own extinction event, and the mammals that survived that extinction, small, marginalized, nocturnal, eventually produced primates, then hominins, then us. Without the Great Dying, the evolutionary pathway from synapsid-dominated Permian to mammal-dominated Cenozoic would not have occurred. The atrocity that killed 96% of marine life is the reason we exist. Gregory Redelac has proposed a minority bolide impact hypothesis, citing evidence of shocked quartz. It remains contested but not dismissed. The Great Dying made mammals possible. 5,000 years ago, the world those mammals inherited started to die in a different way. Number 6. The Green Sahara Collapse. In southeastern Algeria, in the heart of the world's deadliest desert, there are rock paintings of swimmers, hippos, crocodiles, giraffes, elephants, human figures fishing in rivers that no longer exist. The Tassili Nadjur rock art, documented by Henri Lotte in 1956, depicts a world that is almost impossible to reconcile with the landscape surrounding it today. From approximately 11,000 to 5,500 years ago, the Sahara was green. The African humid period transformed the world's largest desert into a lush savanna grassland ecosystem. The region received 10 to 20 times more rainfall than it does today, fed by a northward shift of the West African monsoon driven by orbital forcing. the slow precession of Earth's axial tilt. Lake Megachad, the largest freshwater lake in the Green Sahara, covered an estimated 350,000 to 400,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of the modern Caspian Sea. Its paleo shoreline is still visible from space. At Gobero, in Niger's Teneri Desert, Paul Sereno and colleagues discovered in 2008 the remains of two distinct human populations separated by a 1,000-year arid gap, demonstrating that the Sahara oscillated between habitable and lethal even during the humid period. Then the rain stopped. Peter Domenical and colleagues analyzed marine sediment cores off West Africa in 2000. Dust flux, a proxy for Saharan aridity, increased abruptly around 5,500 years ago. The data suggests a rapid tipping point rather than a gradual decline. Stefan Kruppelin and colleagues pushed back in 2008, arguing from Lake Yoa sediment cores in northern Chad that the collapse was more gradual, unfolding over 500 to 1,000 years. The debate continues. What is not debated is the mechanism that made it irreversible. Matthias Clausen and colleagues showed in 1999 that once rainfall dropped below a critical threshold, vegetation loss accelerated the desertification. Less vegetation meant higher albedo. Higher albedo meant less solar absorption. Less absorption meant less convective rainfall. A classic positive feedback loop. The Sahara did not just dry out, it ate itself. The human consequences were enormous. Judith Bunbury and colleagues documented in 2008 that Nile Valley settlement density increased sharply around 5,500 to 5,000 years ago. Populations forced out of the dying Sahara concentrated along the only reliable water source in northeast Africa. The timing correlates closely with pre-dynastic Egyptian unification. Ancient Egypt may have been built by climate refugees. The collapse also forced pastoral populations southward, contributing to the spread of Bantu-speaking peoples and cattle-herding cultures across sub-Saharan Africa. Julie Dunn and colleagues found in 2012 that some of the oldest evidence of cattle domestication and dairy consumption in Africa comes from green Sahara sites, lipid residues preserved on pottery fragments. Jessica Tierney and colleagues confirmed in 2017, using hydrogen isotope data from leaf waxes in marine sediments, that the monsoon retreat was the primary driver. The megalithic stone circles at Nabta Playa in the eastern Sahara, dating to approximately 7,000 years ago, suggest sophisticated astronomical observation and social organization during the humid period. They were abandoned when the rains failed. Thousands of stone structures across Libya, Algeria, and Chad, documented by satellite imagery, remain largely unexplored. The desertification created the world's largest source of atmospheric dust. Modern Saharan dust storms carry phosphorus across the Atlantic, fertilizing the Amazon rainforest, one ecosystem's death feeding another. The Sahara dried over centuries, but 4,000 years ago the drought came back, and this time it hit 3 civilizations at once. Number 7. The 4.2 Kiloyear Event. In northeastern Syria, the ancient city of Tel Leilan once housed 25,000 people. Harvey Weiss of Yale University excavated it and found that around 2200 BCE, the city was simply abandoned. No evidence of warfare, no evidence of disease, just meters of windblown dust burying a thriving urban center. The drought had come, and the people had left. Tel Leilan was a provincial center of the Akkadian Empire, the world's first multi-ethnic, centrally governed empire, founded by Sargon of Akkad around 2334 BCE. The empire collapsed within a single generation. Irrigation systems failed. Cuneiform records describe mass starvation and refugee crises. The Curse of Akka, a Sumerian literary text dating to approximately 2000 BCE, describes the fall in apocalyptic terms. Fields producing no grain, rivers running dry, famine sweeping the land. It may be the oldest written account of climate-driven civilizational collapse. The 4.2 Kiloyear Event was a severe aridification episode lasting approximately 200 to 300 years. And it did not stop at Mesopotamia. In Egypt, the event corresponds to the end of the Old Kingdom, the pyramid building era, and the onset of the First Intermediate Period. Political fragmentation, famine, social upheaval. The Ipuwer Papyrus describes the Nile failing to flood, fields turning barren, and the social order disintegrating. Nile flood records reconstructed from sediment cores show dramatically reduced discharge during this period, consistent with weakened monsoon rainfall over the Ethiopian highlands. The Indus Valley Civilization, the largest Bronze Age civilization by area, spanning modern Pakistan and northwest India, shows widespread settlement abandonment and population dispersal beginning around the same period. Levi-Joson and colleagues link the Harappan decline in 2012 to weakened monsoon rainfall that reduced the seasonal flooding sustaining their agricultural system. Populations migrated eastward toward the Ganges Plain. 3 of the 4 cradles of civilization crippled simultaneously by the same drought. The signal was so clear, so globally consistent, that it earned a unique distinction. Speleothem records from Mamlu Cave in Meghalaya, India, provided such a precise record that the International Commission on Stratigraphy formally named the most recent geological age the Meghalayan, after this cave. The 4.2 Kiloyear Event is the only climate event in history to define a formal geological age boundary. Peter Domenical found a sharp dust spike in West African marine sediments at this boundary. Tree ring records from Irish oak chronologies show a growth minimum around 2200 BCE, the signal reaching even northwestern Europe. The mechanism. A southward shift of the intertropical convergence zone, driven by North Atlantic cooling, reducing monsoon rainfall across a vast swath from North Africa through the Middle East to South Asia. Augusta McMahon has argued that internal political dynamics, imperial overextension, local power struggles played equal or greater roles in the Akkadian collapse. The drought was a catalyst, not a sole cause. The debate continues, but the post-collapse reorganization is instructive. The third dynasty of Ur rose in Mesopotamia. Egypt's Middle Kingdom emerged. The Harappan transformed into the late Harappan. Collapse was followed by reorganization, not permanent failure. Weiss argued in 2016 that the 4.2 Kiloyear Event established a repeating pattern: climate stress, then agricultural failure, then mass migration, then social collapse, then political reorganization. A cycle visible across multiple prehistoric events. The ITCZ shift mechanism that drove it remains sensitive to North Atlantic sea surface temperatures, the same variable being altered by current climate change. The drought toppled empires built over centuries, but on a small island in the Aegean, a single day would do the same. Number 8, the Eruption of Thera. The dating is still contested. Radiocarbon analysis by Walter Friedrich and colleagues in 2006 favors approximately 1628 BCE. Archaeological synchronisms with Egypt suggest closer to 1500 BCE. What is not contested is the scale. The Minoan eruption of Thera, modern Santorini, was VEI7. Approximately 60 cubic kilometers of dense rock equivalent ejected, roughly 4 times larger than the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa. The eruption destroyed the central part of the island, creating the current caldera, approximately 12 by 7 kilometers, now filled by the Aegean Sea. The Minoan settlement of Akrotiri on Thera was buried under meters of pumice and ash. Spiridon Marinatos began excavating it in 1967. Christos Doumas continued the work. What they found was extraordinary. Frescoes of astonishing sophistication, the spring fresco, the boxing boys, the flotilla, depicting a naval procession. A wealthy, artistically advanced civilization frozen in volcanic death, sometimes called the Pompeii of the Bronze Age. But unlike Pompeii, no human remains were found at Akrotiri. The population appears to have evacuated before the final catastrophic phase, warned perhaps by earlier seismic activity. They escaped the eruption. They did not escape its consequences. Floyd McCoy and Grant Heekin modeled the tsunami propagation in 2000. Waves estimated at 35 to 150 meters high struck the northern coast of Crete, approximately 110 kilometers to the south. Port cities destroyed. The Minoan fleet wrecked. Coastal agricultural land inundated with salt water. The Minoan civilization on Crete was the most advanced society in the Bronze Age Aegean. Palace complexes at Knossos, Phaistos, Malaya, and Zakros. The Linear A writing system. Extensive trade networks spanning Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia. After the eruption, the palaces suffered significant damage and disruption. The exact causal chain, tsunami, ashfall, trade collapse, agricultural failure, political instability is debated, but the trajectory is clear. John Dreesen and Colin MacDonald argued in 1997 that the eruption created a crisis period that weakened Minoan political and economic structures, making Crete vulnerable. The Mycenaean Greeks, based on mainland Greece at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, exploited the vulnerability. They expanded into Crete. They took control of Knossos. They replaced Linear A with Linear B, an early form of Greek. The shift from Minoan to Mycenaean dominance is one of the most consequential power transitions in ancient history. It set the stage for the Mycenaean civilization, the Trojan War era, and ultimately classical Greek civilization. Walter Frederick has speculated that the eruption may be the historical basis for Plato's Atlantis, a powerful island civilization destroyed by natural catastrophe and swallowed by the sea. The Tempest Stele of Pharaoh Ahmose I describes a period of darkness and storms that some Egyptologists have linked to the Thera event. Dendrochronological evidence from bristlecone pines and Irish bog oak shows a growth anomaly around 1628 BCE. The Minoans were not destroyed by the eruption itself. They were destroyed by the vulnerabilities it created and by the competitors who exploited them. 600 years later, the civilization that replaced them would collapse too, along with everything else. Number 9, the Bronze Age collapse. The last letter ever sent from the city of Ugarit on the Syrian coast reads, "The enemy's ships are already here. They have set fire to my towns." The letter was never answered. Ugarit was destroyed around 1185 BCE and never reoccupied. Between approximately 1200 and 1150 BCE, a span of roughly 50 years, nearly every major civilization in the eastern Mediterranean disintegrated. The Hittite Empire, which had rivaled Egypt as a superpower for centuries, collapsed completely. Its capital Hattusa was burned and abandoned. Mycenaean palatial civilization collapsed across mainland Greece. The great citadels of Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos were destroyed or abandoned. Literacy, Linear B, was lost. Greece entered a dark age that lasted approximately 400 years. The Egyptian New Kingdom survived but was permanently crippled. The Kassite dynasty in Babylon fell. The Cypriot kingdoms were devastated. Eric Klein synthesized the evidence in his 2014 book and argued that no single cause was sufficient. The collapse was a perfect storm. Drought, famine, earthquakes, invasion, trade network failure, all hitting simultaneously. The Sea Peoples are the most dramatic element, a confederation of maritime raiders mentioned in Egyptian records from the reigns of Merneptah and Rameses III. The Medinet Habu reliefs carved around 1178 BCE depict a major naval and land battle. The Egyptians claimed victory, but the empire never recovered its former power. The name groups Peliset, Jeker, Shekelesh, Denyen, Weshesh remain among archaeology's great unsolved mysteries. Attempts to identify them with known populations are still debated. Brandon Drake analyzed paleoclimate data in 2012 and identified a significant cold and dry period beginning around 1200 BCE, a Mediterranean-wide drought. David Kaniewski found pollen evidence in 2013 for severe drought lasting approximately 300 years in coastal Syria. Amos Noor proposed in 2008 that a sequence of devastating earthquakes struck the eastern Mediterranean between 1225 and 1175 BCE. Geological faults in the region can produce cascading seismic events. The Amarna letters reveal how deeply interdependent these Bronze Age states were. Tin, copper, grain, luxury goods, and military alliance flowed through networks connecting Egypt, the Hittites, Mycenae, Cyprus, Ugarit, and Babylon. When the networks failed, they all failed together. The loss of tin was particularly critical. Bronze requires approximately 10% tin alloyed with copper, and tin sources were distant: Afghanistan, Cornwall, Iberia. When trade routes collapsed, so did the ability to make weapons and tools. The collapse inadvertently catalyzed the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. Iron, previously a novelty metal, became the practical alternative when tin-dependent bronze was no longer viable. The Philistines, likely descended from Aegean or Anatolian migrants displaced by the collapse, settled along the southern Levantine coast and became a major force in biblical history. The collapse created a power vacuum in which smaller, previously marginal groups rose: Phoenicians, Israelites, Aramaeans. The Phoenicians filled the maritime trade vacuum, expanded across the Mediterranean, founded Carthage, and spread the alphabet that became the basis for Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew scripts. The Bronze Age collapse destroyed the most interconnected civilization the ancient world had ever produced, and from its ruins came the foundations of the world we recognize today. But this video's final atrocity is not about empires or civilizations. It is about 486 individual human beings. Number 10. The Crow Creek Massacre. Approximately 1325 CE, a fortified village on a bluff above the Missouri River. Buffalo County, South Dakota. The Crow Creek people, ancestors of the modern Arikara, had built a palisade wall and 2 concentric ditches around their settlement. They knew the attack was coming. The defenses were breached. The site was discovered in 1978 during road construction near the Crow Creek Sioux Reservation. Larry Zimmerman and colleagues from the University of South Dakota led the excavation. What they found in the inner fortification ditch, the ditch meant to protect the village, was a mass grave. At least 486 individuals, men, women, children, infants. No age or sex group was spared. Over 90% of the skulls showed evidence of scalping, cut marks around the cranial vault consistent with the forcible removal of the scalp. This is the earliest large-scale evidence of scalping in the Americas. Many skulls showed cut marks on the mandible and hyoid bone consistent with tongue removal. P. Willey conducted the definitive osteological analysis in 1990 and documented mutilation patterns, including nose removal, hand amputation, dismemberment, and defleshing. Many individuals had defensive fractures on their forearms. They fought back. Some bones showed cut marks consistent with cannibalism. Whether this was ritual, nutritional, or an act of desecration remains debated among bioarchaeologists. The village was burned after the massacre. Charred structural timbers and fire-reddened earth indicate systematic destruction. Douglas Ousley of the Smithsonian Institution reanalyzed the remains and confirmed that 486 was the minimum count. The actual toll was likely higher. The ditch was not fully excavated. The skeletal evidence tells another story before the massacre. Harris lines, enamel hypoplasia, Crabrae orbitalia, signs of chronic malnutrition. The Crow Creek people were already starving before they were killed. Tree ring records document severe drought across the northern Great Plains between approximately 1300 and 1350 CE. The medieval climate anomaly was ending. The land was drying. Maize agriculture on the Great Plains was marginal even in good years. The Missouri River bluffs provided the only reliably irrigable land. These villages were not just homes. They were the last viable agricultural territory in the region. The attackers are believed to have been a neighboring initial coalescent or Middle Missouri tradition group. Not strangers. Neighbors. Competing for the same shrinking strip of farmable land along the river. The massacre represents a pattern of escalating intergroup violence on the northern Great Plains during the 14th century. Other sites from this period show increased fortification, weapon caches, and embedded projectile points in human bone. When the resources shrank, the violence grew. The Crow Creek remains were repatriated to the Crow Creek Sioux tribe in 1981, one of the earliest repatriations under what would later become NAGPRA, predating the federal law by nearly a decade. 486 people, scalped, mutilated, dumped in the ditch that was supposed to save them. The largest single mass violence event documented in prehistoric North America. Every other atrocity in this video was driven by geological forces, volcanoes, floods, climate shifts. Crow Creek was driven by the same thing that drives every human atrocity: scarcity, fear, and the decision that your neighbor's life is worth less than your survival. The pattern across all 10 events is not subtle. Catastrophe, then displacement, then adaptation. The Campanian Ignimbrite cleared ecological niches for Homo sapiens. The younger Dryas shock catalyzed agriculture. The Green Sahara collapse concentrated populations that built Egypt. The 8.2 Kiloyear Event drove urbanization in Mesopotamia. The 4.2 Kiloyear Event toppled empires that reorganized into new forms. The Bronze Age collapse produced the Phoenician alphabet in classical Greece, but this is survivorship bias. For every population that adapted, dozens simply died. The Neanderthals did not fail to adapt, they were annihilated. Crow Creek shows that climate stress does not always produce innovation, sometimes it produces butchery. The pattern is not that disaster creates progress. The pattern is that survivors are forced to innovate or die, and geographic luck, location, not fitness, is the dominant variable. Every one of these events operated through known physical and chemical laws, volcanic explosivity indices, orbital forcing, thermohaline circulation, tectonic movement, all described by equations. The same equations govern modern climate models. The Phlegraean fields sit beneath 3 million people and have been accelerating seismically since 2012. The AMOC is measurably weakening. The Sahel is drying along the same feedback loops that killed the Green Sahara. Greenland's ice sheet is producing freshwater pulses into the North Atlantic, the same mechanism that triggered the 8.2 Kiloyear Event. The ITCZ shift that drove the 4.2 Kiloyear drought remains sensitive to North Atlantic temperatures, the same variable being altered right now. The Bronze Age collapse demonstrated that interconnected civilizations fail together. Modern globalized supply chains carry the same systemic risk. Lee Kump has compared current carbon dioxide emission rates to the conditions leading up to the End-Permian. The parallels are not exact, they are not comforting. 10 events spanning 5.33 million years to 1325 CE. The largest flooding event in geological history, the eruption that ended the Neanderthals. A cosmic impact that erased a continent's megafauna, a glacial lake that built the first cities. The worst mass extinction in Earth's history, a desert that was once a paradise, a drought that toppled 3 cradles of civilization, a volcano that destroyed the Minoans, a systems collapse that ended the Bronze Age, and 486 people murdered by their neighbors over a strip of farmland. The laws of nature are not cruel. They are indifferent. Understanding them is the only advantage any species has ever had.